Rain fell hard on the small town of Green Valley. People holding black umbrellas hurried into Happy Garden's funeral home. Tommy Lee was among them, holding tight to his dog Rex's leash. Rex was a big, friendly German shepherd with brown and black fur. Tommy didn't want to bring Rex to his mom Betty's funeral, but the dog had been crying day and night since she died last Monday. As soon as they walked in, Rex started acting weird. The funeral home had two hallways. The left one led to room 1, where Tommy's mom was, and the right one led to room 2. Rex kept pulling towards room 2, even though they had visited mom in room 1 just yesterday. The dog's nose was working overtime, sniffing the air like he had caught an interesting smell. Bob Smith, the funeral home owner, stood near the entrance in his black suit. He was a short man with gray hair who usually smiled a lot. But today, he kept looking at Rex with worried eyes. Every time Rex made a sound or moved, Bob would grab his phone tightly and look nervously at room 2's door. Pastor Mike had just started talking about Betty's life when Rex suddenly stood up straight. His tail wasn't wagging anymore. Instead, it was stiff as a stick. Then Rex did something very strange. He growled. This wasn't normal for Rex, who was always a happy dog that loved everyone. The growl was deep and scary, making everyone turn to look at them. Bob quickly walked out of the room, still holding his phone like it was super important. Then things got really crazy. Rex's growl turned into loud barking, and with amazing strength, he pulled the leash right out of Tommy's hand. But the weird part was that Rex didn't run to Mom's coffin. Instead, he ran straight to room 2, where Bob had left the door a tiny bit open. The barking that came from room 2 didn't sound like Rex anymore. It was different, deeper and more urgent, like he was trying to tell everyone something important. Then Tommy heard another sound that made his blood run cold. Behind Rex's barking, he could hear what sounded like someone crying for help. But that wasn't even the strangest part. As people started standing up to see what was happening, Tommy noticed something odd about Bob's phone, which he had dropped while running out. On its screen was a message that read, "Second body ready for pickup at midnight. Don't let anyone in room 2 until then." Tommy's heart started beating faster. His mom wasn't the only body in Happy Gardens today, and something told him that the other person might not actually be dead yet. The rain outside got harder, and thunder cracked so loud it shook the building's windows. Rex's barking got even louder, and now it sounded like he was scratching at something in room 2. Several people had gotten up from their seats, but they seemed scared to move towards the sound. Tommy looked at his mom's coffin, then at room 2's door, knowing he had to make a choice. Should he ignore Rex and respect his mom's funeral, or follow his dog and possibly uncover something terrible happening in Happy Garden's funeral home? Just then, the lights flickered, and in that brief moment of darkness, Tommy heard a sound that made his decision for him. A woman's voice, weak but clear, calling out, "Help me." What happened next would change everything in Green Valley forever. Tommy ran towards room 2, his heart beating fast. Some people tried to stop him, saying it wasn't right to leave his mom's funeral, but the crying sound was getting louder. When he reached the door, he saw Rex scratching at a big metal door in the corner of room 2. This room looked different from room 1. It was colder, with weird machines and a strange chemical smell. Bob suddenly appeared from behind some curtains. His face was red and he was breathing hard. "You can't be in here," he shouted, trying to grab Tommy's arm. "This is a private area. Your mother's funeral is in room 1. Show some respect." But Rex wouldn't stop barking at the metal door. The dog's behavior was getting stranger. He would bark, then put his ear to the bottom of the door, then bark again, like he was trying to talk to someone. Tommy noticed something else too. There were fresh scratch marks on the floor, leading to the metal door. They looked like they were made by someone's fingernails. "I'm calling the police," Tommy said, pulling out his phone. That's when Bob did something completely unexpected. He laughed. "Go ahead," Bob said, suddenly calm. "Officer Jim and I are old friends. We've worked together for years. Who do you think helps me with the special cases?" A loud bang came from behind the metal door, making everyone jump. Then a voice called out weakly, "Please, anybody?" More people from the funeral had followed Tommy into room 2 now. Among them was Mrs. Chen, who used to be a nurse. She looked at the machines in the room and gasped. "These aren't funeral home equipment," she said. "These are life support machines." Suddenly, the power went out. In the darkness, they heard Bob running, his footsteps heading towards the back exit. Rex barked once and chased after him. Tommy had to make another quick decision. Should he help Rex catch Bob, or try to open the metal door to save whoever was trapped inside? Before he could decide, someone screamed. In the dim light coming from people's phone screens, Tommy saw something that made his skin crawl. Written on the wall, in what looked like fingernail scratches, were the words, "They take people who live alone. No one looks for us." Thunder crashed again outside, and in that moment, Tommy remembered something important. His mom, Betty, had lived alone, just like he did. And according to her doctor, she had been perfectly healthy just last week. The pieces were starting to come together, and the picture they formed was more horrible than any nightmare. Through the darkness, Tommy heard Rex barking from somewhere outside, followed by the sound of a car engine starting. But there was something else too. The metal door was slowly creaking open by itself. The metal door opened with a long, slow creak. In the dim light from phone screens, Tommy saw a small room that looked like a hospital room, but scarier. Inside, on a bed with wheels, lay an old woman. She was hooked up to machines, just like the ones in a hospital. Her name was Martha Wilson. Tommy knew her because she lived down the street from him and always gave out the best candy on Halloween. "Martha!" Mrs. Chen rushed to her side. "I thought you were on vacation in Florida." Martha was weak but awake. Her hands had broken nails. She was the one who had scratched the messages on the wall. "They've been keeping us here," Martha whispered. Her voice shook as she spoke. "Bob and Officer Jim. They watch old people who live alone. When they think nobody will notice, they take us. They tell everyone we're on vacation or moved away. Then they wait for someone to die naturally and—" She couldn't finish her sentence. Tommy felt sick to his stomach. He looked back towards room 1, where his mom's funeral was supposed to be happening. "My mom, was she really—" "Your mother wasn't dead when they brought her here," Martha said, tears in her eyes. "None of us were. They keep us alive until someone else dies naturally. Then they switch us. The real dead person gets quietly cremated, while they slowly—" Martha started crying. Suddenly they heard more barking outside, but it wasn't Rex this time. It was coming from somewhere under the funeral home. Tommy remembered seeing steps leading to a basement near the back door where Bob had run. Mrs. Chen was helping Martha sit up when they heard car doors slamming outside. Through the window, they saw police lights. But were these real police officers, or more people working with Bob and Officer Jim? The barking from the basement got louder. It wasn't just one dog now. It sounded like many dogs. Tommy remembered all the missing dog posters he'd seen around town lately. Dogs were usually the first to know when something was wrong, just like Rex had known about Martha. "There's more people down there," Martha said, pointing at the floor. "In the basement. That's where they keep most of us. I could hear the dogs barking to us every night." The police lights got brighter outside. Someone had to go check the basement, but the police were coming in the front door. Tommy looked at his phone. No signal. Bob must have some kind of signal blocker in the building. They needed to get help, check the basement, and keep Martha safe, all at the same time. Then they heard a familiar bark. Rex was back, and he had something in his mouth. It looked like papers. When Tommy took them, his hands started shaking. They were death certificates, dozens of them, all signed by Officer Jim. But the dates on some of them were for next week, next month, even next year. The front door of Happy Gardens burst open. Footsteps were coming down the hall, and from the basement, they could hear more voices calling for help. Tommy had to think fast. He could hear footsteps coming closer, heavy boots in the hallway. Martha was too weak to move quickly, and they had no way to know if the police outside were good or bad. Then he remembered something from his childhood. His mom used to work at Happy Gardens years ago as a cleaner. She had once told him about a secret way out. Mrs. Chin and another man from the funeral helped Martha into a wheelchair they found in the corner. The dogs in the basement were barking louder now, and the voices calling for help were getting stronger, like they knew rescue was close. Just then, Tommy's phone buzzed. The signal blocker must have stopped working. A text message popped up from an unknown number. "Your mother found out about us. That's why she really died. Get out now. Not all cops are bad. Officer Sarah Miller is looking for us. Find her." The footsteps were right outside room 2 now. Tommy quickly took a picture of the death certificates and sent them to every number in his phone, along with a message about what was happening at Happy Gardens. Even if they got caught, someone would know the truth. They quietly rolled Martha towards the flower room, trying not to make noise. Through the window, they could see more police cars arriving. One of them had a female officer stepping out. Could that be Officer Sarah Miller? The flower room was cold and dark. Old refrigerators hummed along the walls, full of roses and lilies for future funerals. But these flowers seemed strange. Some of them looked fresh, but had cards dated for funerals next month. Bob and Officer Jim had been planning deaths in advance. Rex suddenly stopped and pointed his nose at one of the refrigerators. When Tommy opened it, he gasped. Inside, hidden behind the flowers, were bottles of something labeled fast-acting heart stop, leaves no trace. Things at Happy Gardens were even worse than they had imagined. They could hear people entering room 2 now, shouting when they found it empty. The refrigerator was heavy, but with everyone pushing, it slowly moved to reveal a dark hallway behind it. As they helped Martha through, Tommy heard a voice from his nightmares. "Check the flower room! They can't have gone far!" It was Officer Jim. But before they could all get through the secret door, Rex started barking and running back towards the hallway. He was heading for the basement stairs. Tommy knew Rex wanted to save the other dogs and people trapped down there. "Go!" Martha whispered. "Get me out. Find Officer Miller. Rex and you, Tommy, you have to help the others. They have families looking for them, just like your mom was looking for the truth." The footsteps were getting closer to the flower room. Tommy had to choose, escape with Martha and the others, or follow Rex to the basement and try to save everyone else. Tommy looked at Martha and the others, then at Rex waiting by the basement door. "Mrs. Chen, please get Martha to Officer Miller. Show her the death certificates on my phone. I have to help the others." Before anyone could stop him, he ran after Rex. The basement stairs were dark and creaky. Tommy used his phone's light to see where he was going. The barking got louder with each step. At the bottom, he found something horrible, a long hallway with rooms on both sides, like a prison. Each room had a small window in the door, and medical machines beeped inside them. Rex ran to one of the doors and scratched at it. Tommy looked through the window and saw Mr. Johnson, his old math teacher who had moved to Florida last month. In another room was Mrs. Baker from the library, and in another was Mr. Roberts, who used to run the ice cream shop. All of them were hooked up to machines, just like Martha had been. Suddenly, all the dogs that had been barking came running around the corner, 5 of them, all wearing collars with their names and addresses. They must have broken free when they heard Rex. Tommy recognized them from the missing dog posters: Lucky, Max, Buddy, Daisy, and Rocky. They had been locked up because they knew something was wrong with their owners. "Tommy Lee!" a voice boomed from the top of the stairs. Officer Jim was there with Bob and 2 other police officers. "Your mother was too curious, too. Guess you're just like her." But then something unexpected happened. One of the officers with Jim suddenly pulled out her gun and pointed it at Jim. "Police, hands up! I'm Officer Sarah Miller, and I've been investigating missing persons cases in 3 counties, all of them led here." Everything happened very fast after that. Jim tried to run, but all the dogs worked together, circling him and Bob, keeping them from escaping. More police officers, good ones this time, came running down the stairs. Tommy started opening all the doors, helping people who had been trapped for weeks or months. Each person had a story about how Bob and Jim had taken them when they thought nobody would notice. The dogs ran to their owners, tails wagging, happy to finally save them. But then Tommy remembered something that made his heart stop. His mom's funeral was still happening upstairs. If she had discovered the truth and they had killed her, then who was in the coffin in room 1? Rex seemed to read his mind. The dog ran up the stairs, and Tommy followed. They had to know the truth about his mother. Behind them, they could hear Officer Miller reading rights to Bob and Jim, and more police helping the rescued people. When they reached room 1, Tommy stopped at the door. Did he really want to know what was in that coffin? But Rex was already pushing the door open with his nose, and what they saw inside changed everything they thought they knew about that rainy day. Room 1 was empty. Everyone had run out when they heard the commotion. The coffin sat alone under the bright lights, surrounded by flowers. As Tommy walked closer, Rex started acting strange again, not barking this time, but wagging his tail happily. Tommy's hands shook as he approached the coffin. Just before he could touch it, he heard a noise from inside. Not a scary noise, but something that sounded like tapping. "Mom," Tommy whispered. His heart was beating so fast he could hardly breathe. The tapping got louder. Rex started jumping around the coffin, excited. Tommy noticed something odd. There were small holes drilled in the sides of the coffin, almost too small to see. They looked like air holes. With shaking hands, Tommy opened the coffin. Inside, weak but alive, was his mother Betty. She was hooked up to a small oxygen tank, hidden under her funeral clothes. Her eyes were open, and when she saw Tommy, she smiled. "I knew. You'd figure it out," she whispered. Her voice was weak but clear. "I found their plans in the old computer files. They were going to take me next, so I pretended to find them out. They thought they really killed me with that heart-stopping drug, but I had been taking the antidote I found in Bob's office." Tommy helped his mom sit up. She was weak but okay. "They didn't know I was still alive," she continued. "They were going to bury me today, then dig me up tonight and put someone else in my place. I heard them talking about it when they thought I was dead." Suddenly, more footsteps came running into room 1. It was Officer Miller with other police officers. They stopped in surprise when they saw Betty alive. "The files," Betty said, trying to stand. "Everything is in the old computer files. Names, dates, plans for future victims. I copied everything before they caught me. The flash drive is ... She pointed at Rex. Tommy checked Rex's collar. There, hidden inside the padding, was a small flash drive. His mom had planned everything, even getting Rex to the funeral to rescue her. But their relief didn't last long. Through the open door, they heard Bob's voice shouting from somewhere in the building. "If I'm going down, this whole place is going down with me." Then they smelled smoke. Bob had set the building on fire. They could see orange flames starting to climb up the hallway walls. They had to get out fast, but Tommy remembered all the people still being helped in the basement. And what about the evidence? If the building burned down, would Bob and Jim get away with their crimes? The smoke was getting thicker. Rex barked at the door, but this time he wasn't running out. He was waiting for Tommy to make a choice, run to safety with his mom, or go back to help the others one last time. "Mom, can you walk?" Tommy asked quickly. Betty nodded, though she was still weak. "Officer Miller, please help my mom out. Rex and I need to warn the others." Before anyone could stop him, Tommy ran back towards the basement, Rex right beside him. The smoke was getting thicker, making it hard to see. They could hear fire trucks in the distance, but the flames were spreading fast. When they reached the basement, Tommy saw Officer Miller had called for help. Medical teams were helping people up the stairs, but they were moving slowly because many people were weak, just like Martha had been. "The back exit!" Tommy shouted, remembering the secret door behind the flower room refrigerator. "It's faster than the front stairs!" The smoke wasn't as bad in the basement yet, but they could hear the fire crackling above them. Tommy and Rex led everyone through a different hallway to the flower room. The other rescue dogs, Lucky, Max, Buddy, Daisy, and Rocky, helped their owners walk, just like they had been trained to do. But when they reached the flower room, they found Bob there, trying to burn the files and evidence. When he saw them, he grabbed a large book, the funeral home's real record book, filled with proof of his crimes. "Looking for this?" Bob laughed, holding the book over a growing fire. "No evidence, no crime." Then Rex did something amazing. He looked at the other dogs, and without barking, they seemed to understand. While Rocky and Max kept Bob away from the secret door, Buddy and Daisy worked together to knock him down. Lucky grabbed the book from his hands, and Rex pulled Bob's sleeve, keeping him from running. The fire was spreading into the flower room now. Everyone hurried through the secret door as firefighters rushed in through the front of the building. Officer Miller and more police officers ran in to help, making sure no one was left behind. Outside in the parking lot, Tommy found his mom sitting in an ambulance. She was looking better already. Martha and the others were getting medical help too. News cameras were arriving, and people from all over town were coming to see what was happening. But something wasn't right. Tommy counted the rescue dogs. Someone was missing. Rex wasn't there. Then they heard barking from inside the burning building. Rex had gone back in. Through the smoke, Tommy could see why. Jim had escaped from the police and was trying to run away through the funeral home's back door. The firefighters tried to stop Tommy, but he knew he had to help Rex one last time. He ran back into the building, into the thick smoke, following the sound of Rex's barks. The smoke inside was so thick that Tommy could barely see. He pulled his shirt over his nose and stayed low to the ground, just like they taught in school. He could hear Rex barking and Jim shouting somewhere ahead. The fire had spread everywhere. Parts of the ceiling were falling down, and the walls crackled with flames. Through the smoke, Tommy saw Rex chasing Jim towards the old storage room. Jim was still holding something. It looked like another book of records. "Rex, wait!" Tommy called out. But Rex was doing what his mom had trained him to do, stopping bad guys from destroying evidence. Tommy remembered how his mom used to work as a police dog trainer before working at Happy Gardens. That's why Rex was so good at this. The storage room was filled with old coffins and funeral supplies. Jim ran inside, thinking he was trapped, but he didn't know about the old window near the ceiling, another escape route Tommy's mom had told him about. As Jim tried to climb up to the window, Rex grabbed his pant leg, pulling him back down. But then something terrible happened. Jim kicked Rex, and the dog hit one of the old wooden coffins. The coffin fell over, blocking the door. Tommy could still see through a small gap, but he couldn't get in. "Help!" Tommy shouted, hoping the firefighters could hear him. The smoke was getting worse, and he could hear the building creaking above them. It was going to collapse soon. Then Tommy saw something that made him proud. Rex wasn't giving up. Even after being hurt, he got up and faced Jim again. This time, Rex wasn't alone. Through the window came the other dogs. Lucky, Max, Buddy, Daisy, and Rocky had followed them back in. They must have smelled the danger and came to help their new friend. Jim looked scared now. He was surrounded by 6 angry dogs, all working together. He tried to climb up again, but the dogs formed a circle around him. Rex barked once, and all the dogs started barking together. It was so loud that even people outside could hear them. The firefighters finally arrived, breaking down the storage room door. They grabbed Jim just as he was about to throw the records book into the flames. All the dogs ran out together, with Rex carrying something in his mouth, a small key he had pulled from Jim's pocket. Later, they found out it was the key to a secret safe in Bob's office, which survived the fire. Inside were more files, money taken from victims, and evidence going back many years. But they weren't safe yet. As everyone ran for the exit, the building started making loud cracking noises. The ceiling was about to cave in, and not everyone was out. The firefighters were yelling for everyone to get out. Tommy looked back. Most people were safe, but he saw 2 legs sticking out from under some fallen wood. It was Officer Jim, knocked down by falling ceiling pieces while the firefighters were leading him out. Even though Jim was a bad person, Tommy knew they couldn't leave him to die. The dogs seemed to know this too. Without anyone telling them, Rex and the other dogs ran back to Jim. Together, they started pulling at his clothes, trying to drag him out. "Everyone together!" Tommy shouted, running to help. He grabbed Jim's arm while the dogs pulled from different sides. Other firefighters joined in, and finally, they got Jim free. Just in time, too. Seconds later, the spot where Jim had been was crushed by more falling ceiling. They all ran for the front door. As the building groaned and cracked behind them, the dogs led the way, with Rex making sure everyone was following. As they burst out into the parking lot, the entire building collapsed with a huge crash. Outside, it was like a busy street fair, but scarier. Police cars, fire trucks, and ambulances had their lights flashing. News reporters were talking into cameras. People from all over town had gathered to watch. Many were crying and hugging their loved ones who had been rescued from the basement. Betty ran to Tommy and hugged him tight. "Don't you ever do that again," she said, but she was smiling. Then she looked at Rex and the other dogs. "Good boys and girls," she whispered, patting each one, "just like I trained you." That's when Tommy learned the whole truth. His mom hadn't just worked at Happy Gardens as a cleaner. She had been working undercover for years, training police dogs and gathering evidence. When she discovered what Bob and Jim were doing, she trained Rex specially for this day. "But Mom," Tommy asked, "why didn't you tell me you were alive in the coffin earlier?" "I had to wait," Betty explained. "I needed Bob and Jim to think their plan was working." The flash drive in Rex's collar wasn't just about their crimes. It was a video of them planning to bury me alive and replace me with someone else. I recorded everything. As they talked, Officer Miller walked over with amazing news. They had found even more proof in the safe that Rex's key had opened. Bob and Jim had been doing this in other towns too, but now they were caught for good. But the biggest surprise was still to come. As everyone watched, a black car pulled up, and a woman in a suit stepped out. She walked straight to Betty and smiled. The woman in the suit pulled out an FBI badge. "Agent Sarah Parker," she said, smiling at Betty. "Or as you've known her for the past 5 years, your next-door neighbor, Sarah from the flower shop." Tommy's mouth fell open. His mom wasn't the only one working undercover. Their neighbor Sarah, who had given him birthday presents and watched Rex sometimes, was really an FBI agent. "We've been tracking funeral home crimes across the country," Agent Parker explained. "Betty was our best undercover agent. When she found out Happy Gardens was part of a bigger network, she helped us set up today's operation." Tommy looked at his mom with new eyes. She wasn't just his mom who made great cookies and helped with homework. She was a hero who had saved many lives. One by one, families arrived to reunite with their loved ones who had been rescued from the basement. The missing dogs ran to greet their owners too. Lucky went home with Mr. Johnson, Max with Mrs. Baker, Buddy with Mr. Roberts, and Daisy and Rocky found their families too. The news cameras filmed everything. Reporter Jane Kelly, who had covered all the missing persons cases, was crying as she told the story. Today, thanks to the bravery of Betty Lee, her son Tommy, and a group of heroic dogs led by Rex, a terrible crime ring has been stopped, she reported. Bob and Jim were led away in handcuffs. They would go to jail for a very long time. Officer Miller found papers in the safe showing they had done this to more than 50 people in different towns. As the sun began to set, Betty hugged Tommy and Rex close. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you I was alive," she said, "but I always knew you would help solve this mystery. You and Rex make a great team." A week later, the mayor held a special ceremony in the town square. Every person who had been rescued got a chance to tell their story. The dogs, especially Rex, got special medals for bravery. Tommy and Betty were given a key to the city. But the best part happened at the end of the ceremony. Agent Parker announced that the FBI was starting a new program, training dogs to help find missing people, just like Rex and his friends had done. They were calling it the Rex Program. Tommy looked at Rex, who was sleeping peacefully at his feet, his new medal shining on his collar. His dog wasn't just a pet anymore. He was a hero who had helped change things for the better. As for Happy Gardens, it was torn down. In its place, the town built a beautiful park with a special dog play area. They put up a statue of Rex and his 5 dog friends, reminding everyone that sometimes the best heroes have 4 legs and a wagging tail.